got you out of quarantine. This is Nate and Callie, and we take our masks very seriously. Happy Wednesday! We so wish we were hanging out, but here we are once again in our own homes. And we have a very fun community segment planned for you. All you need is a dice. So go grab a dice. If you're anything like us, you've already been playing lots of games and you probably have one laying around. And this game is super simple. You roll the dice and you answer questions based on the number you roll. Kind of like Skittles, but minus the Skittles with the questions. Super simple.
So, if you have a 1 and you roll a 1, you have to ask yourself, man, what was my favorite part of the day? So, Callie, what was your favorite part of the day?
My favorite part of today was probably going for a walk and enjoying the nice sunshine. It was great. If you roll a 2, text your friend and say, yo, what'd you eat for dinner? Nate, what'd you eat for dinner?
I had Alfredo and a burger. Super random combination. It worked, but it was leftovers night, so it was just kind of a random thing. So, Callie, if you roll a 3, you have to do jumping jacks. So you have to do 10 jumping jacks. Nobody counted, so.
Good. And if you roll a 4, ask yourself, what has God been teaching you lately? So, Nate, what has God been teaching you lately?
He's been teaching me to enjoy the rest and the relaxation through this quarantine. Before, we were going like crazy people. We were at something every single night. He's also forced us to slow down, and we've gotten rested and really have just grown to enjoy the time. So, number 5, if you roll a 5, you have to text somebody, same gender, that you look good. So I'm not gonna text anyone, but Callie, you look good. So
even in my sweatpants?
Even in your sweatpants. I mean, we are married, so I can do that. So
yeah. And if you roll a 6, last but not least, you should probably get up and go like brush or comb your hair. It could have been a few days. Nate, you may want to brush your hair. There we go. No matter what you do, don't dye your hair. Oh, kidding. It's quarantine. Do whatever your parents say. Well, we were gonna have announcements with Jamie and Jamie tonight, but they're in their homes, we're in our homes, and there's not much to announce still. We'll continue to keep you all updated as we know more. We love you all like crazy. We wish we were hanging out with you all right now, and we will one day soon.
Hey Graceland students, it's good to see you again this week. We are on week 4 of our Kingdom Values series, and we are talking this week about the theme accountability. So accountability might be the most unfamiliar out of all the lessons that we're doing this week. It's something we don't really practice a whole lot. It's something that's easy to not talk about, maybe something that's even a little bit intimidating. But I think our passage tonight is going to show us that accountability is essential for the Christian life. And it's something that we absolutely have to practice if we want to grow as Christians and live the life that God has called us to live. So accountability is our theme this week. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 18, as we have been the past few weeks now. We're going to start in verse 15. If you want to go ahead and grab a Bible and start finding your place there. So accountability is a very countercultural idea. I'm sure most of you are familiar with, we live in a world and a culture that is very let me do me and I'll let you do you type of mentality. As long as what you're doing doesn't directly hurt me, then why does it matter? I should just let it go. So what we're going to be talking about today is something that really challenges and goes in the face of what our culture practices in a lot of ways. But I want us to imagine and picture a loving community that cares about each other and that loves Jesus enough to fight sin personally and to help each other fight sin in our own lives. So that's the vision, that's the picture of what we're talking about tonight when we talk about accountability. So the main idea for the lesson today is that Christians deal with sin because we love each other. I want that idea to sink in for us. I want it to be something that drives our lives together as believers. So look now at Matthew 18 with me, and we're going to be reading starting in verse 15. Jesus says, "If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault, between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you, if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them. So we're going to start with the question, why? Why do Christians use accountability? Accountability is so important. It goes back to what we talked about last week, which is pursuit. Christians love each other so much that we cannot simply let each other wander off into sin. Have you ever been in a situation where you tried to tell someone something, you tried to get the point across, and they either didn't hear you or simply didn't acknowledge what you said? So often when that happens, we just say, well, they'll figure it out soon enough. And that feels like kind of the kind thing to do sometimes, to simply ignore it and let it go. And yet what we saw last week is that Christians love each other so much that we pursue each other. When one of the 100 sheep wanders away, we, like the Father, chase after them. And that's what we do in accountability. So why? It starts with love. We love each other. The second reason is that holiness matters. Holiness matters. Hebrews 12:14 says, strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. So holiness matters. If we don't have holiness, we will not see the Lord, Hebrews says. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about this idea of cheap grace. Too often we act like forgiveness is free and comes without a price. But God has called us to faith and repentance. So holiness matters for the Christian. And then the last reason why is restoration. Our desire in all of this is so that when a Christian walks away from the church, wanders off into sin, and breaks fellowship, that this person would be brought back into community. That's why we seek accountability. James 5 says this, my brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. So Christians do this to seek restoration for each other. We want to see them brought back. So that's the question, why? Now we're going to get into what. What is Christian accountability? Let's get a little more tangible. If you want just a simple definition, you could say accountability is helping each other walk in holiness. So our desire is to help each other grow and walk in holiness, obeying Jesus. If you have heard of accountability, it's likely been in the context of accountability partners. Accountability partners are a very good idea. It's something I would encourage for you. It's not the purpose of this passage, but I still want to take a minute to talk about this because it is a good and important idea. So an accountability partner is when you have intentionally found another Christian and you ask that person to help you walk with Jesus. And maybe there's a specific issue you're trying to work through. Maybe you simply want someone to speak into your life. But that is the goal there. And so the difference is that an accountability partner is a very proactive thing. If you want it to go well, you've got to be proactive. If you're struggling with something or if you need that accountability, you need to take the first step to go and look for it. On the flip side, if you've agreed to help someone as their accountability partner, now you've got a responsibility as well. So there's got to be a proactive aspect to that. You also, in accountability, you have to have trust. You have to be able to share something and know that this person's going to treat that with respect and kindness. With that trust, maybe comes a willingness to open up about your own struggles in return. So maybe you share how you've dealt with the same thing, how God's maybe helped you, or maybe other struggles that you face in life. So trust is essential. And then I would encourage you, if that idea of an accountability partner scares you, start small. Simply share something you're maybe more comfortable with sharing. Maybe you got upset with your parents last week. Ask for prayer with that. Maybe you and a friend, got in an argument about something. Start by sharing something you're comfortable with. If there's something that you know you want to work through but you're afraid to talk to, start to build up in that direction. But again, seek that. So accountability partners is a good thing here. But what this passage is talking about is something a little different. The accountability here is when we have to deal with an unconfessed sin. When someone has chosen sin, but is not willing to confess it. So it's not proactive like an accountability partner. So chapter 18 deals with this reality that sometimes we as Christians have to confront people in their sin. And that can be a scary and hard and challenging thing. And in fact, it can go wrong from time to time. So we have to be careful because we don't want to approach this in a way that isn't helpful or that pushes someone away. We want to do it in a way that shows we love them and are seeking to draw them back. Again, remember why behind this. So that gets to the question of how. We've talked about why, we've talked about what. Now let's talk about how. So I don't know if anyone's ever confronted you about something or had a conversation where they challenged you about a decision you were making or about something you were doing. But sometimes those are the most helpful and important things that can happen in life. This is an instance from my own life. My parents weren't necessarily the pushy type. They were always encouraging and supportive, but they weren't always very pushy. So I started cross country in 8th grade. I liked running, I always had, but I was also very involved in music at school and at church. And so in 9th grade, I got to a point where I was getting so involved in music that I thought about quitting running. And my dad, again, not always a very pushy person, when I told him that, stopped me and sat me down and said, "Caleb, you're good at running. That's something I know you like to do, and I think if you keep working hard at it, you might see success in that area." So he challenged me not to quit, even though I was thinking about it. And I went on and actually ran in college. Running's been a part of my life now for 13 years. I even got scholarship and went to run the Boston Marathon. And now to think that in 9th grade, I almost quit running. And yet my dad, because of that conversation, I stayed with it, stuck with it, and that's been a part of my life ever since. Now, of course, that's not an issue of sin like we're talking about here, but sometimes those challenging conversations are the most helpful conversations. So Jesus gives us a 3-step process of how we can have these conversations. I was trying to think, and if you have any ideas, I'd love to see them in our comments. I was trying to think of anywhere else that Jesus gives us a 3-step process, or even just a process. But in this passage, Jesus actually gives us, here are the 3 steps to take in accountability. So if you think of something else where Jesus gives us a process, I'd love to see that in the comments. So we're going to walk through this process. Starting in verse 15, we see step 1, and that's to have a personal conversation. Step 1. Verse 15, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. So step 1, have a personal conversation. Why do we do that? Why should we go alone to start with? I think it's because Jesus knows that too often we tend to gossip. Someone does something, whether it's against us or we see them do something wrong, we love to tell other people. And that's not right. That's not what we're supposed to do. That's why Jesus tells us, go and talk to that person. And just think, with so many issues, whether that's sin or whether that's just challenges in the church, if we took this first step and went and talked to the person, just think how much that would actually solve the issue. We'd never have to go to steps 2 or 3. We'd never have all this gossip or all these broken relationships. Instead, if we went and had this conversation, so many things would be dealt with right away. So that's step 1, is to confront them personally. Step 2, you do this collectively. In verse 16, we see, but if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. So in step 2, you're supposed to take 1 or 2 people with you. Now, hopefully you're taking someone who's already familiar with the situation, who loves this person and cares about them. The goal here is not to gang up on them or intimidate them, it's to rescue them. That's what we're trying to do here. And so when you bring 1 or 2 other people into it, it can help you. You know, last semester we talked about the passage where Jesus says, if you have a log in your own eye, don't try to fix the speck in someone else's eye without taking that log out of your own eye first. When you invite 1 or 2 other people, they can speak to the situation, make sure you're not missing something, but then hopefully the person you're holding accountable will see the seriousness that you've brought one or two others in. They care, they love as well, and you're seeking to bring them back. But if that person still has not repented, still isn't willing to admit their sin and turn from it, then you move to step 3, which is verse 17. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. So this, again, is a very challenging passage for us. This isn't something we see a lot. I honestly don't know if I've ever been in a situation where I've seen a church take something to this point. So why would we do this? Why would we get to the place where someone refuses to admit their sin, so we bring it to the church? It goes back to that question of why, doesn't it? We do this to show that we love this person. We want them to see that they are walking in disobedience to God. It's hindering their relationship with Him, and it might even be leading them away from Him. Ties into that second idea that holiness matters. God calls us to live lives of faith and repentance, obedience to Him. And without that, we don't have that relationship with Him that He has called us to. And then lastly, the goal is restoration. If this person finally sees the seriousness of their sin, then they turn. They'll walk in holiness with Jesus. And that's the desire, that they be brought back into fellowship, and the church forgives them and moves on. At any point in this process, if the person confesses his sin, we forgive them. We're going to talk about that more next week, the idea of forgiveness. But we forgive them and move on from sin. But if this person refuses, then we see in verse 17, you're supposed to treat them like a tax collector and a Gentile. When someone's life is full of unrepentant sin, that shows the Spirit probably is not at work in their life. The goal is to help them see the seriousness of their sin and that they need to walk in obedience to Jesus. Maybe that means that they need to actually submit their life to Jesus for the first time. And so we see here a picture of the gospel, that we're trying to help people see that we need forgiveness of sins, that Jesus died to redeem us from sin and to bring us into a life of holiness, walking with Him. So our desire in all this is that they would see the gospel, that they would be restored into not only relationship with other believers, but into relationship with God Himself. So we're calling them to faith and repentance, just like every other person in the world. So I hope that this idea of accountability is something that you see is meant to be a beautiful picture of the gospel. It's not supposed to be scary. It's supposed to be something that brings hope and life. And it's a new idea to you. It's probably something that I could experience more in my life. I hope that we take this week and think about, how can I fight sin with my brothers and sisters out of love for one another in order to walk with Jesus more in holiness. We love you guys. We miss you all. We hope you're doing well, and we look forward to being back together soon.